John Eric, and thank you for making sure that I made it here on time and that my presentation is complete. There is a long-standing joke that I work on my presentation until the very last minute, so I'm really happy to be here, and also how nice to be back in in-person events. So what I would like to talk about today is avoiding the shipwreck, and I'll give you a little context to that in a moment. For those of you that don't know me, my name's Katryna Dow. I'm the founder and CEO of Meeco. And we have one uniting mission since the company was founded almost 10 years ago, and that is to enable equity and value for everyone that participates in the digital economy. And by everyone, we mean finding a way for us and our digital twins to join the value chains that we create, to cooperate with organizations to create mutual value. And just in the way that we enjoy physical rights in the physical world, we see that for the future generation, we need to make sure that we extend those to digital rights, and a big part of that is participation. And if you can't participate in the value that's created, then you're disintermediated, and that's not a society that we think will ultimately flourish. So why this talk about, oh now it's going too fast, why this talk about shipwrecks? So Suzanne reached out to me on the invitation to join the agenda today, and there was a little mini interview to promote the event, and I shared this, which is my absolute favorite quote. It's from a French tech theorist, and it's one of the guiding principles we use in Meeco. We recognize that there are many things that we are doing to enable this digital future, but every technology inherently has the inverse effect. And so when you invent the ship, you also invent the shipwreck. When you invent the plane, you also invent the plane crash. So no matter how well-meaning we are as professionals, no matter how best-intentioned we are, there will be unintended consequences of some of the decisions that we're making now. And one of the best ways to avoid that is to consider those things and play devil's advocate. And what I'd like to do in the next 20 minutes is take you through some of those considerations, share one or two use cases with you, some of the work that we have been doing in this area, and by no means suggesting that we have all the answers, but one of the things that I think does help avoid the shipwreck is working as a community, understanding the importance of networks, and understanding that it's actually together that we spot these blind spots, or we see where these opportunities are, and therefore we're likely to create much better collective solutions. And why? Because more and more digital adoption, particularly post-COVID, means that we're connecting our physical and our digital worlds. And we also know that personal data linked to AI with our digital identity at the center is becoming increasingly the way society works. And in the last week or so, here we go again, yeah? How many whistleblowers does there need to be? How many issues around the algorithm? I think there was really interesting discussions yesterday in terms of whether we need to move this regulation as far upstream as possible. Because the truth is, when people say, yes, I agree, I consent to this one single attribute in this one single user journey, I actually am not understanding how that information may be correlated or joined to something downstream and the decisions that may have. And I think this is the shipwreck that we're watching right now. This is the unintended consequences of saying, oh, we want people to be able to find their high school friends from 30 years ago or share cat pictures. And now what we have is a situation where we've seen the highest percentage of teenage suicide, depression, particularly amongst young girls. And what we know is that there, according to Frances Howe, the whistleblower, is that the business model is optimizing that content for negative engagement. There's a small article that I wrote in 2015, I think, and I'm thinking I might republish a retrospective of it called Seatbelts, Cigarettes and Data, because when I was a child, there were no seatbelts at first. And cigarettes were not regulated. And I think one of the things that we will start to see, and I'm hoping we'll see this through leadership in the EU, is that we start to understand some of these shipwrecks. Why? Because convenience, digital convenience is critical. And we're seeing, again, post-COVID, an accelerated adoption, not necessarily because people want to, but because they have to. But this also means that if things are not well designed, privacy is decreasing. And McKinsey's published a report towards, I think maybe it was August last year, to say they think as a result of COVID, we've seen an acceleration of 7 years in terms of digital uptake. So how do we find this balance? How do we balance these trade-offs and create equity? And I think it is possible. And also to organisations, institutions, will companies that find this balance either create greater loyalty, particularly with an emerging generation that are more digitally savvy, or will they actually find that they're squeezed between the business model of providing products and services or turning their customer into a product? And so these are some of the questions that we need to see play out. We also see that enterprise adoption is moving more and more into distributed. We see the distributed world is becoming more mainstream. Still, a lot of that is experimental. But I would like to just share with you very quickly one use case, one case study that we've been working on in Australia for the last year. Because I think it is relevant to a lot of the discussions that we saw yesterday, and that is FPOS. So for those of you that don't know, FPOS provide the debit payment infrastructure in Australia, the payment rails. For the trust framework they adopted, there were actually a team from Innopay here in the Netherlands that worked in Australia to help craft that trust framework. FPOS realised that with the massive consolidation in the payment space, that the ability to repurpose their infrastructure and their rails for identity was an opportunity. But so one of the things that FPOS have recently done is launch a new service called Connect ID, which is a federated identity service. And they're also accredited from a commercial perspective because it's a not-for-profit backed by the banks and the large retailers in Australia, but they've also been accredited against the highest trust level for government. But this was just the start, thinking about the repurposing of payment rails with identity. The other thing that was groundbreaking was that FPOS became a member of the Governing Council for Hedera, to start to look at how distributed ledger, or specifically the strength of the Hedera Hashgraph consensus capability, could bring another layer of innovation. And there are a number of reasons why FPOS decided to do that, but one that I want to point out, because I think it's part of the shipwreck, is that Hedera recently, I think in the last couple of weeks, published a number of reports to show not only fast, fair, secure and stable, but also clean. And I think this is something we're hearing from enterprise as well. There is now this opportunity to move towards blockchain solutions, but what is the environmental impact? And so what we're starting to see is that decisions, even around identity or blockchain, are multi-layered. And one of the things that we wanted to be able to do is help show the power of being able to bring existing capabilities, for instance, Connect ID, and some of the work we've been doing with W3C around verified credentials together. But one of the use cases FPOS wanted to test was micropayments. Would it be possible to enable tiny fractional use cases to purchase one song, one newspaper article, using an Australian stablecoin backed by a cryptocurrency, seamless to the customer, so the customer is just basically topping up their debit card in the way that they would do any day to tap on and off public transport. So very, very simple from the customer point of view. But the work we were doing behind the scenes was actually leveraging OpenID Connect, verified credentials, to wrap that payment inside a proof of age that somebody was able to consume particular kind of content based on their age, or have the flexibility in one wallet, and I use the word wallet carefully, meaning container, meaning stack, meaning infrastructure, that would support digital identity, verified credentials, micropayments, and also tokens, token exchange. And why tokens? Because when we start to look at this emerging generation that are online playing games every day, they live in a tokenized economy already. And so their user experience and the way they're interacting every day in terms of exchanging value is already in a tokenized world. So that's one example of a financial institution working together to be accredited alongside government, working together with standards body, working together with a company like us, Meeco, that is focused on building that new infrastructure. So now that we can tokenize unique value, and I think this is the big shift, what's the new value that can be enabled? And we had some really good discussions and debates yesterday. I was in the group that were talking about the wallet and who pays for it. And the answer was it depends. And it depends because there will be many different types of use cases, and where that value was created and generated is where we will start to see new commercial models. But actors won't work together without incentives. We're kidding ourselves if we think that there's this utopian new world. And so what are some of those accelerators? Those accelerators are mitigating risk, price, security, new service opportunities, convenience, customer experience. And it's not just one of those things, it's how you can bring each of those aspects together that will start to create these new value opportunities, new business models, new value chains, the ability for organisations to step in and be custodians on behalf of their customers, provide great digital experiences, but at the same time protect their identity, protect their data, enable them to exercise their rights. And why is that important? Well, my hope here in the EU is that some of the changes, the Data Governance Act, some of the new regulation will help us transition from these super platforms to these ecosystems. Because just as we saw yesterday with the 3 organisations that were nominated for awards, a stack is made up of component parts. It's how we bring these different technologies together to enable a very powerful and robust ecosystems. And it's the way that we collaborate that can start to create not only new commercial opportunity, but can embed some of these things like data right and consent and privacy management as value adds for customers. So right now, we're at the beginning of a new architectural phase. I believe this very strongly. I mean, I have the grey hairs to prove that I see that a lot of the work we've been doing over the last decade, and I don't know whether it is COVID or whether or not it's the rise of distributed ledger or it's just an emerging digital generation, that we're kind of at this point right now where there is this opportunity to design differently. And we can do really cool things like Audi has been doing, which is this vehicle to infrastructure. You know, car speaking to road. Rob Allen, who led the project when he was the entrepreneur at residence at FPOS around micropayments, describes an opportunity that you're running late for work and you incentivize someone in front of them with a token. You pay them to slow down, get out of the way, or change lanes. Now that sounds crazy, but actually it's all of this, when we start to think of, you know, my watch, my refrigerator, my car speaking to your car, these things are not so crazy. And if I have a trusted identity and payment layer built into my car, I can do a real-time bid on the way to get here to say, okay, I'm going to incentivize you, you, and you for this much. And then another car comes in and we have this real-time auction that's happening. And it sounds like it's science fiction, but I'm sure I'll be standing here 10 years from now, 20 years from now, and we'll be laughing at how mainstream such a thing is. But just because technology can do it doesn't mean it should. And why? Because that exact same approach is being used in China for managing a whole social behavior platform such that almost the entire population of Australia, which is around around 24, 25 million people, but I think it was about, it was 23 million people were banned from buying travel tickets because of their social score. It's the same technology. So we smile when we think that we can jump in our Audi, we know when the traffic lights are going to turn red, we can incentivize somebody to get out of the way, and that's a ship. That's a beautiful, fun ship, and I want to join that world. Exact same technology used in the same way that says not only can you not incentivize, but you can't get on a train, you can't get on a plane. So the shipwrecks are inherent in everything we're doing. Why is this important? Because we also see this growing chasm between customer expectations and privacy and a feeling of helplessness. Just look at the whistleblower and her pleadings in those congressional hearings. She was saying, this is known, we have the documentation, we can intervene, and I think people just don't know where to start. And if we don't know where to start thinking, and this is something else that came up at our discussion yesterday, this idea of roles and context and mandates, if we don't start looking at consumers and people in a role-based way, then we will miss huge amounts of value. Each of us are citizens. At times we're a patient, or we may be a student or an employee or a passenger. And the things I might be willing to do as a passenger, prove that I've been vaccinated in order to get home, might be very different to what I want to do at a medical clinic if I'm not sure how that data may be repurposed for another reason. So just some very, very quick lessons from some of the implementations we've been doing over the last 18 months in bringing decentralized and federated or centralized worlds together. Disclosure. Identity is now really personal. Yeah, it's not just what's on my body, it's what's in my body. It may be that I've swallowed a little nanorobot to monitor some aspect of my well-being. So this fusion of the physical and the digital, this phygital, means that we have a lot of responsibility in the way that we design, the way we identify. We also understand that consent, if badly implemented, and implemented with a dark pattern, will force someone to simply say yes. We know how easy it is to do that. However, what we don't know is where we may be in terms of downstream consequences. Again, seatbelts, again, cigarettes. Where will we be a few years from now if it will be evident that things like dark patterns, algorithms have actually been designed to manipulate? So this comes back to corporate social responsibility. This comes back to, okay, we want to be able to attract employees, customers. What is the design pattern that we want for consent? Can we start to look at patterns around minimal collection, maximum value? Why? Because people will pay for that. People will engage. Oh, you meaning I don't have to choose between convenience and privacy? I can have a great experience and also exercise some control? Every time we've tested this with participants, more than 94% of the time it's resulted in people being willing to share more data or opt into something where they can see there is mutual value. Here are the two emerging things that we haven't really started to talk about in the identity community yet. And this is why I think some of this work that we did together with FPOS and Hedera is so important. Tokenomics and treasury. These are new words that we need to introduce into our lexicon. Why? Because tokenization is incentivization. So this is about how we get actors to come together and exchange some kind of value. And treasury, because we need to have transparency and we need to be able to settle things fast. If my Audi is asking your VW to get out of the way and you're not sure whether you're going to get paid, you're not changing lanes. Yeah? But if you know that we have the infrastructure that you can see as you flick yes, your token balance or your bank balance or your fuel balance has just changed, you've been incentivized. And also, if you don't get out of the way, I've got your number plate, so I'll have some recourse in being able to settle that. So this is where we've started to see, and we've taken a different approach with the decentralized wallet to say we think just identity or credentials is not enough. If we can't marry it together also with payments and also token exchange, then we probably don't have an extensive or robust enough solution. But that also means we need to have strong governance, hence the reason for working with Hedera and the consensus algorithm. And also we need some sort of recovery. And let's be honest, we're not there yet complete with key management. One of the big problems in terms of decentralized is when I leave my device, my keys, I drop it in the toilet, I leave it in a taxi, I have multiple devices, you know, blah, blah, blah. I can't explain it to my mother. I can't give it to my children. So we do still have work to do around designing trusted either escrow services or key services. If we get this right, we could enable a much more equitable, personalized world which focuses to decision enablement. So this is not about selling and trading data. This is about helping people make better health, financial, mobility decisions. And that is where there is extraordinary value. But we've got to be able to bridge these two worlds. We've got to find what the connectors are between the existing world, because it's unreasonable to think a bank, an insurance company, a government, an airline is going to throw away millions or tens or hundreds of millions of dollars of infrastructure and security to start working in a new world. We have to find how these two worlds come together. And we need to be building these connectors now. We need to find this hybrid technology that connects these worlds. And some of the organizations that are at the forefront of this is by no means exhausting, is the Distributed Identity Foundation working on standards, what's happening with the GAIN idea for the banks extending OpenID Connect, which is some of the work we did with FPOS, W3C around verified credentials, and a shout out again, also here in the Netherlands, to the team that started with Data Sovereignty Now, just starting to look at the soft infrastructure that could enable these worlds. So back to 2016, before my grey hair, when I was much younger, a big nod out to Robert and the team, because spotting what we were trying to do in 2016 and acknowledging that we were on a path helps towards that acceleration. And during COVID, one of the things that we were forced to do was think, okay, if we can't travel and be in the same room with a whiteboard, if we can't sit with a customer, what if we decentralize our tech stack? What if we document everything? What if we create a developer portal? And what if we make it possible to work remotely? And I'm happy, relieved, pleased to say that that was successful, because what we were able to do was start to work with companies like Vela in Australia, also leveraging Connect ID to start looking at a secure value exchange of workforce credentials for digital onboarding and digital offboarding in the workforce. And this is going to be critical for the next year, 2 years, 3 years, maybe forever. Maybe we'll never go back to the way things were previously. The work I've already spoken about with FPOS, taking this decentralized wallet and extending the stack into payments and tokens to say, well, how could you enable a much broader range of use cases? Working with startups around leveraging our Vault technology to build value propositions for families. So My Life Capsule focuses on intergenerational. How do you take care of aging parents in a digital way? How do you start to teach young children important digital behaviour and safeguard their information? And last but not least, some of the work that we've all been doing in Belgium with a not-for-profit around building a media platform for children 0 to 7 to help them develop good digital habits, protect their data, and my personal mission, teach them about key management. I mean, if I could succeed with that, then I think that would be great. So where does that bring us? It brings us back to where we started, the ship or the shipwreck. There will be unintended consequences for the things that we're doing right now. We're bound to get some things wrong, but I hope as a community we will be able to use forums like this, the discussions we had yesterday, to avert some of those. So the big question is, can we find this middle path quickly where we create great customer experience, but we're also able to build in privacy and security by design, not because we have to, but because we see it's an amazing set of features that build trust, build transparency, and create new models. So, thank you.
Can you hear? Yeah. That was a great presentation, Katryna. Really insightful. When systems talk to each other, for example, the car, BMW already talking to other cars, I'm thinking, how will it be if they talk autonomously themselves? You know, what will be the implication?
I think they will, because I think what will happen, I'm a big sci-fi fan, so I imagine I wake up in the morning and my diary already knows I'm running late because my smart mirror is saying, your hair looks dreadful, you really do need another 10 minutes. So it's already sent a message to my coffee machine to say double shot, which has already sent a message to the car to check the level, and then started to negotiate a path forward. And again, that sounds like science fiction, and maybe, that's not the next decade, but we'll set rules. And I think, I can't remember who mentioned it yesterday in our working group, but this idea of mandates and roles. My role today is I need to get to IDnext, and I need to present, and I'm in a hurry. My role is as a participant, but I've got to get there, okay? Which might be very different to, I'm 8.5 months pregnant and in the middle of nowhere, and I now need to get to a hospital or whatever the case may be. So our roles and the mandates, I think we will need to work out how to bake those things in, and then there will be a set of rules, yeah? So you wake up in the morning and go, rule 1 again, pay everyone to get out of my way.
Great. Any questions for Katryna?
So your car example is, I think, a very nice example where you enable the user to have a choice, or to make a choice, in this case, pay so that he can go faster. But that assumes that users actually have that choice. What if I'm the guy in this really rotten Volkswagen Beetle without a dime, so I can't pay? How is that fair and equal, and how is that enabling?
I think this is the shipwreck. I think it's difficult. So the reason I use the Audi example is because I believe it's a couple of years now that they've had this infrastructure to vehicle capability. So at the moment, it's anticipating the average speed to mean that you don't have to stop at a traffic light and those kinds of things. But as we start to build out more sensors, and I actually think how we avoid this digital divide is really, it's the shipwreck. Yeah, and also the other thing is, at the moment we think in terms of money, right? But I don't know if you noticed, the incentive may actually be access to electricity or energy. So it might be that I don't have money, but I have solar panels. And when we start to think of this peer-to-peer economy, we need to be thinking, we're so, at this stage of my life, I'm so schooled in a particular business model or idea of unit of value. But we need to be thinking of a generation that are growing up playing games where it's about barter or space or access. And so I think there will be new forms of value. But your question speaks to the heart of the shipwreck. Yeah, which is why we need policymakers to actually understand, because technology is developing much, much faster than policy. Yeah, it's a very good question.
You use the example of what we have in China, the disempowerment of some, and arguably in the US it already exists also with your credit score.
Yes.
Your credit score is also a big determiner of many things that have nothing to do with your credit. These technologies could increase the balkanization of the world. What movements do you see as necessary to avoid plane crashes related to wildly different approaches to society?
I woke up this morning and first thing I saw in my inbox was Manu Sporny from W3C working on, don't quote me, but I think it's the DIDCOM standard. And I believe Apple, Google, Mozilla, yeah, have lodged an objection to try and stop it. So look, these battles that end users have no idea about are being really hard fought right now. So we've been part of that community, a huge amount of work that have gone into creating something that's open standard. And that's why I think here in Europe, this move from platform to ecosystems can influential actors, large retailers, financial institutions, can they find mutual value for an end customer and actually start to say, look, the ecosystem approach is more protective than these large platforms. But that battle is happening today, yeah? It's happening right now. So years of work and effort from the community, and then you have a large organization come along and say, you know, we want to kill this, so it can't go ahead, yeah? So that's, I think, the work for all of us in the community, sadly.
So one quick question, last one.
Yeah, so I think you asked me this question yesterday, and I want to ask it back. So you were talking about tokens.
Yeah.
So how are we going to protect the individual from choosing tokens over privacy? So that, in particular, where there's like people who are poorer will choose to just give their data away still to the Facebooks, and privacy will only be for the rich.
Look, it's another shipwreck. And I think the thing with tokens is, the easiest way, I think, to get our minds around this is tokens are just air miles or loyalty programs or coupons or discount. We have tokens right now. We have incentives already built into kind of reward behavior. And I think if we're getting to the regulation at the point of the token, we've probably failed. Like this question around the DIDCOM. It's further upstream. So for instance, it might be that my consent pattern with the car or my rule is so narrow that it is only ever within, you know, a vehicle, streets, city or something like that, so that that can't be repurposed in some way. And I think this idea that we're at this architectural junction is why there's so much responsibility, because there's so many things to work out. And we can't work them out without implementing, because it's not until you implement that you realize. So it's a little bit chicken and egg. But I think this is, again, is one of the shipwrecks. I think the shipwrecks are really obvious. Yeah, sadly.
Great. Thank you, Katryna. And big round of applause for Katryna. Thank you very much.